Okay, well, the next group of questions comes from a multidisciplinary group, which you're familiar with, that operates out of principally Stanford and Princeton, and also Berkeley, who are working in an advisory capacity with the current administration in shaping economic and financial policy. Their first question, they say, Mr. LaRouche, we have several questions for you today that have arisen during our ongoing deliberations. As you know, we've broken down into different task forces, and some of the questions that we present to you today may reflect that. We'd also like it to be noted that we agree that it would be far more productive and undoubtedly more efficient to conduct this discussion with all of us seated around a common table. It's our current understanding that there are certain political obstacles to that happening, but that steps are being taken to resolve them, and so we're hopeful that they will soon be resolved. But in the interim, we do have questions that we'd like you to address. The first question says, as public dissatisfaction with the bailout grows, it's also increasingly clear that there is no amount of money that will satisfy this monster. So bankruptcy reorganization is increasingly seen as the only workable alternative. It would seem to many of us to be a no-brainer, but there is still a problem involved, and that is that in our discussions, it would seem that bankruptcy reorganization, while it will alleviate a certain immediate problem, will not solve the problem of the views and agreements that underlie the current structure of the banking system. I'm not going to read this whole thing, it's just too long. Basically what they're asking is if you can help identify for them the specific flaws in the underlying principles and how to address them.
Well, as I think some of you know, that in the 25th of July of 2007, I not only reported the imminence of a general breakdown crisis internationally of the present system, but indicated a number of measures to be taken during that period, and then I followed that up with supplementary statements on the same subject in the following weeks. Now, the first thing I proposed was the enactment of a piece of legislation called the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act for 2007. I also indicated at a later point, this point, a few weeks later, the 4% interest rate for regular banking, regular loans, and a lower rate on a government project, 1.5% to 2%. And also to ensure that banks which were in trouble, but which were chartered banks, not the speculative banks like the Wall Street banks, but the chartered banks, the ones that have deposits in them and do all this local thing on the federal level and state level. These banks be protected. And that these banks be put under bankruptcy protection in order to continue their essential function in the community, and we would work with them to try to work their way out of the bankrupt condition. The same thing for the homeowner. So the idea was we're going to keep people in their homes if they and we're not going to let them be thrown out. We're going to find arrangements to keep them in their homes until we can resolve this bankruptcy problem. And secondly, we're going to protect the chartered banks of the state and federal banks of the United States. And then we have to go from a federal level to a much more general operation in terms of reorganizing the United States and the world financial situation because of the crisis. If those policies, which I enunciated then through the beginning of September, had been adopted, the United States would be out of the woods today. We would still have a problem, but the problem would be manageable and it would be under control. The failure to take those actions is the problem. What we do is go back to the fact we made some mistakes with the Bush running loose. And simply say, okay, do it now. The Obama administration should do it. They should say, they've tried other things, they weren't working, and they're not going to work. Therefore, the following has to be done. Now, on the question of this vast bailout operation, it should be canceled. It's a terrible mistake. It was induced by undue pressure. A lot of people made mistakes. They supported it. They supported this. We opposed it. And you should make the list of people who voted for it under great pressure. They should never have supported that bill, the bailout. Should have gone through bankruptcy. Now the only thing you can do today is put this thing through bankruptcy, because bankruptcy means bankruptcy protection. The federal government takes the relevant institutions into bankruptcy protection, which means nothing bad happens to these institutions. They're not shut down, they're not looted, they're not touched. What we have to do is we take all this crap inside, by this merger of the banking system. We take all this crap and we put it in a room and we shut the door and keep it shut. We take the things which in the bank, or the banking system, which are equivalent to what we had under normal protection beforehand. Glass-Steagall. We use the Glass-Steagall standard and we reorganize the banks which qualify as chartered banks. That way, we do two things. First of all, we take the crap that was put in there among what had been chartered banks, and we freeze it. We take the part of the bank which corresponds to the operations of chartered bank operations, and we process them as Roosevelt did with the bank holiday. We process them to function, go back on the road right away. Instead of bailout, we provide federal credit to these banks so they can, as chartered banks or banks of a chartered form, which conform to a Glass-Steagall standpoint, are able to continue to resume functioning under federal protection. Thus, we try to take the viable part of the U.S. economy, get it functioning again. Just a normal way. You've got a structure. You've got communities. You've got banks in a community. Now they're worse off than they were before. With all the measures they've taken, have made the thing a mess. Everything was done by the federal government, instead of doing what I indicated has been a terrible mistake. Admit it. We made a terrible mistake. Fine. Okay, we're now going to do the right thing. Go back and do it. Enact the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act in this form. Now, put the bank, portions of the bank, which are viable by chartered bank standards, Glass-Steagall standards, we protect them. The other part, you have to. You have to get rough. Look, do you realize how much was stolen from the American people by this swindle? How much is being stolen still every day by the American people? Well, how many foreigners are coming in and looting our institutions on this species cases? And someone's saying this is an agreement? What about agreements? Didn't we agree to things that have been canceled? No, we go back to moral standards. And if something was wrong, it was wrong. And you say so. You say, this was a mistake. We're now going to reverse it. This was wrong. We're going to reverse it. That's the power of government. That's what government is supposed to do. And because I know that if we, as of then, July of 2007, what I had immediately as a policy would have prevented any of this from happening. And it was only corruption in the government, merely typified by Senator Dodd or Bonnie, Frankenstein. That what these guys did and what others did, what Goldman Sachs did. Goldman sucks. These firms, what these fascist organizations are doing to the United States, admittedly fascist organizations. No, we use the power of government, the sovereignty of government. Now this is a tricky area because remember, from 1936 to 1938, Franklin Roosevelt was under real pressure to shut down the revival of the U.S. economy. And there were 2 rough years during that period, in which Roosevelt kept the program going, but the expansion wasn't going. And it was the fascist organizations, the predecessors of Amédée Chalais, who did the job. When Roosevelt had the chance, he resumed the Reconstruction program. We're going to have a problem. It's going to take courage to fight that problem, because the whole horde of all these monsters who have looted our banks, who have looted our citizens, looted our country, and are betraying our country, who are actually conducting a form of warfare against the United States, especially from the British Empire. That's the enemy. But if, as Roosevelt demonstrated at the time of Pearl Harbor, we have a very angry U.S. population. Below this level of the U.S. Congress, the anger is enormous, is building, is assuming lynch mob characteristics in some cases because of what's been done to the American people. If you mobilize the American people in a condition like warfare, as for war, to defend the United States against its rapacity, the American people will respond. But you must respect another principle of warfare. When you're in command, you've got to stay in command. Don't flinch. Don't say, oh, we did that for you, but we have to take it back because some people didn't like it. No. If you're right, you don't change. And you know the American people have an intention as to what they want, and they've expressed it very strongly recently. You have to respond to that and say, we're going to do that, and sit back and trust the American people. If you're president, that's all you've got. If they can't trust you, then you can't trust them. Don't betray them. Now, Obama has not made a mistake of actually betraying the American people. He's made mistakes. But he's not made that moral mistake yet. But he can't afford 2 more of these mistakes. He's got to act soon. And he's got to use, as Franklin Roosevelt did, when he has the thing in his hand, as when Pearl Harbor happened, Roosevelt let loose and did everything he had to do. And we won. We won. We got the fascists on the run, the U.S. fascists on the run. And we did so because the president acted promptly and with firmness in doing what had to be done. And the American people supported him. And the fascists went and hid for a while in secret chambers and then emerged later with Truman. So the point is, that's what has to be done. There are measures which can be taken. Take them. And make them a fighting issue. The defense of the nation against an enemy. The American people will be able to understand that. And after what the treatment they've gotten from the Bush administration and from the enemy of Obama now, they've got every right and they've got every power to do this. It takes the guts to do it and also intelligence, of course.